Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the voice of the American Dissident, and I'm your host, Jeffrey Whittela. This is the second broadcast of my show, and me and many others all across this great republic of ours are fighting a fight in an attempt to wake up the American people to the dangers that we're in. I'm going to read to you tonight a document that was produced in the 1950s, and it was authored by President Harry S. Truman. President Harry Truman was a globalist. He was a traitor to the American people, and he believed in destroying the sovereignty of not only the United States, but the sovereignty of all nations on the face of this earth, and create a world government commonly referred to as the New World Order. This document I've uploaded on Google, and I've uploaded it to Scribd, www.scribd.com. I will bring up the document and we will read it, and your eyes will be wide open. And we are going to zoom into the document. And as you can see, that this document is entitled Our Foreign Policy. And it was created by the Department of State, Department of State Publication 3972, General Foreign Policy Series 26, released September 1950, Divisions of Publications, Office of Public Affairs. To my fellow Americans, at a time when the duties of citizenship fall heavily on thousands of young Americans, there is a duty that all of us can and should impose on ourselves, to be well informed about the problems that face our country. So weigh the facts to understand the inner and to form our own opinions and judgments. This is not an easy undertaking, but is necessary if we Americans as a people are to exert our full influence for peace and freedom and justice. Now, when you listen to a politician speak, you can believe the opposite of exactly what they're saying, because Harry Truman did not believe in freedom, and he did not believe in justice. He believed in slavery, and he believed in intolerance. We are going to go down to some of the more salient admissions in here. In the beginning of what he entitled Its Roots, the first part of the document, it says, there is no longer any real distinction between domestic and foreign affairs. And the reason he said that, ladies and gentlemen, is because in 1945, when the UN Participation Act was signed into law and passed by Congress and signed by President Truman in the subsequent United Nations Charter, the United States of America and all the nations of the world were immersed in this world government that's currently known as the United Nations. What does it mean to build an international community? What politician today, when they're speaking about world affairs, have you not heard them referred to as an international community? We have to bring the nations of the world into the international community. We have to bring Iraq back into the international community. We have to bring Afghanistan back into the international community. When they talk about that, in reality what they're doing is they're referring to this document. They are following State Department Publication 3972 to the letter. To that end, they began to plan and build an international community which people could live in peace under the protection of law. And there again, that's doublespeak, because since the inception of the United Nations, there's been more wars and conflicts fought in the name of quote-unquote peace than any period before in mankind's entire recorded history. The United Nations is not an instrument of peace, but it's a weapon of war being used to form a world government. It may in time lead to an international control of all armament, which is essential. It may lead eventually to a form of world government, which is a possibility that excites the imagination of some adventurous people. I'm going to read that to you again, and we're going to zoom into it as close as we can. And I'm going to move it over so everybody can see. And I'm going to zoom in and move this so you can see that it may in time lead to the international control of all armament, which is essential. It may lead eventually to a form of world government, which is a possibility that excites the imagination of some adventurous people. So you see here, ladies and gentlemen, Harry Truman's old... I hope that I'm sorry for the problem, ladies and gentlemen, but I lost my connection to the internet and I'm back up now, and we'll continue with the broadcast. And I really apologize for that, because sometimes we get a computer glitch and things happen. We are going to keep continuing going down the document. There's something the matter with my computer. It seems like whenever I want to broadcast, Scribd seems to want to freeze up on me, and I'm terribly sorry. So if everybody will be patient, we will continue with what we are talking about. Getting back to what I was saying, Harry Truman was a globalist, and he wanted to promote a world government, and in his own admissions, he states it in this document. It's State Department document, publication 7277, and it was created in 1950, and it was put out by the State Department. And we will go back up to get to one of the points that I want to make to everybody. And it says, in all these difficult tests of its strength, the United Nations has been fortified by the full consistent support of the United States. It has enjoyed the solid moral backing of American public opinion. And the reason that it has enjoyed the backing of American public opinion, ladies and gentlemen, is because the American people have been lied to for well over a century about everything. And they were lied to about the inception of the United Nations. They were lied to about its real purposes. And they're being lied to this day. I'm going to close out for a moment. And we are going to, when I get to the other part of the document, I'm going to zoom back in, and I want to read to you some of the more salient points. The measures the United States government has taken and is taking to stimulate world production and trade to help raise the standards of living my computer, and I'm apologizing again, ladies and gentlemen, because when I broadcast and try to scroll with this document on Scribd, it seems like Scribd wants to freeze up on me all the time, and I'm apologizing, and I'll try to get this figured out in a subsequent broadcast. It says, the measures the United States government has taken and is taking to stimulate world production and trade to help raise standards of living abroad with the aid of technical skills and capital, and to promote cooperation among nations for these purposes are what, and I lost it because Scribd is being nasty to me again, and I lost my page, and this is not going well for me again tonight. But I'm back up to it. We call our economic foreign policy. Obviously that policy has broad political as well as economic goals. The first United Nations agencies to get underway were aimed primarily at economic cooperation. And we've seen that economic cooperation, it's worked very well, hasn't it, in America? It's called the GATT agreement, and it's called the NAFTA agreement. And for those of you that may be listening, we're living in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and all of our other industrialized states. Look at where your jobs are going. Being shipped to China, being shipped to third world nations where there's slave labor. Our textile industries are being slowly picked apart now, and they're being shipped to places like Honduras and Mexico and Bangladesh. Go shop at some of the stores once and see where your clothes are being made. Shop anywhere and see how many products that you can buy solely American in the course of a year. As a matter of fact, there was a lady a couple years ago who decided that her and her family were going to buy nothing but made in America. And they struggled. She wrote a book on it, and it's been widely read. Why are your jobs leaving America? Your jobs are leaving because we have globalists in our government and in charge of our government that are destroying our economy. Go find a job today and see how well everything goes. Can't believe this. And again, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I got disconnected from the internet. I just bought a new internet service, and it worked fine all day until I decided that I was going to broadcast, and now I seem to be having problems. But to continue with the broadcast, I was saying, look at the state of our economy today, ladies and gentlemen. Food prices are high, gas prices are high. It's becoming almost impossible to live. Why is that? Why can't you find a decent job today? Why can't you afford to raise your family, pay your bills, and have some modicum of entertainment and peace and safety and happiness in your life? The reason is because we have people that are running our government that are traitors to our country. They're traitors to their people. And I have the proof. I've researched it. I've researched it for 20 years. And I'm reading you the proof in these documents. They plan to disarm the United States. They plan to disarm the American people. They plan on creating a United Nations army. And I have another document here that we're going to talk about very shortly that proves that. It's called State Department Publication 7277, and it was put out in 1961. And it details the disarmament plan in 3 stages. And in these 3 stages, it progressively strengthens the United Nations quote-unquote peace force that they have been for decades stealthily creating right in front of the faces of the American people. And I will bring that document up here on Scribd, from Scribd, and we will take a look at that document. And I will bring that document up, and we will find it. It's in my files, and as soon as I have it brought up, I will show you that document. And it's loading now, and we will zoom into it as soon as it's loaded up. This document is entitled Freedom from War, the United States Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World. And when they're referring to disarmament, ladies and gentlemen, they're referring to the elimination of weapons of all kinds. And that includes the firearms of the American people. And we will scroll down, and we will go over what's in this document. This document was put out by the Department of State It is entitled Department of State Publication 7277. Disarmament Series 5. Released September 1961. Office of Public Services, Bureau of Public Affairs. And we'll go to the introduction and read the introduction. The revolutionary development of modern weapons within a world divided by serious ideological differences has produced a crisis in human history. In order to overcome the danger of nuclear war now confronting mankind, the United States has introduced at the 16th General Assembly of the United Nations a program for general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is all doublespeak. The world has never been peaceful in the entire history of mankind. And they're not talking about having peace in the sense of peace that you and I would think of. When they talk about disarmament and peace, they're talking about disarmament, and they're talking about total and complete slavery. This new program provides for the progressive reduction of the war-making capabilities of nations and the simultaneous strengthening of international institutions to settle disputes and maintain peace. And when they say that, ladies and gentlemen, what they are talking about is they're talking about stripping the sovereignty, the national sovereignty of all nations on the face of this earth in order to create their world government. And it says, first, there must be immediate disarmament action, a strenuous and uninterrupted effort must be made toward the goal of general and complete disarmament. At the same time, it is important that specific measures be put into effect as soon as possible. Second, all disarmament obligations must be subject to effective international controls. The control organization must have the manpower, the facilities, and the effectiveness to ensure the limitations or reductions take place as agreed. It must also be able to certify to all states that retained forces and armaments do not exceed those permitted at any stage of the disarmament process. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in stage 2. The wars that were fought in Iraq was basically to force Iraq to disarm, even though they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and it forced them into the quote-unquote international community. Third, there is an inseparable relationship between the scaling down of national armaments on the one hand and the building up of international peacekeeping machinery and institutions on the other. Nations are unlikely to shed their means of self-protection in the absence of alternative ways to safeguard their legitimate interests. This can only be achieved through the progressive strengthening of international institutions under the United Nations and by creating a United Nations peace force to enforce the peace as the disarmament process proceeds. That is why all of these wars that we're fighting are wars of conquest. They are designed to eliminate those nations that they call rogue states. They're designed to eliminate their armies. They're designed to disarm their people and to force them into the New World Order. And there is another salient point here to make. As states relinquish their arms, the United Nations must be progressively strengthened in order to improve its capacity to ensure international security and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Disarmament must proceed as rapidly as possible until it is completed, in stages containing balanced, phased, and safeguarded measures. Ever why, ladies and gentlemen, why there's always a massive drive by members in Congress to take away your guns? Well, see, they know about State Department 7277, and you probably don't. The majority of you probably don't know that this document ever existed. It's certainly not taught to you in school that it exists. They're trying to take away our firearms, America, to turn us into slaves, to make the United Nations an all-powerful institution, to create their world government, and to turn us into subservient subjects to that despicable organization. An organization, need I remind you, that sits on United States soil, where leaders like Hugo Chavez, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and other world leaders who constantly trash us, trash our freedoms, trash our institutions, trash our way of life, get on a plane, land in the city of New York, and they go there, and they're greeted with open arms by their globalist allies. And it's happening right in front of you. And it's been happening in front of you for many decades. In order for us to maintain our freedom, what little freedom that we have left, we have to awaken those that are not awake, and we need to share this information in our communities. And we're going to scroll down and we are going to talk about the stages. And I'm going to zoom back in on the screen and zoom in, and I'm going to show you what it says. The first stage contains measures which would significantly reduce the capabilities of nations to wage aggressive war. Implementation of this stage would mean that the nuclear threat would be reduced. All states would have adhered to a treaty effectively prohibiting the testing of nuclear weapons. Do you remember when John Fitzgerald Kennedy in the 1960s proposed test ban treaties with the Soviet Union and banning nuclear testing in the atmosphere? Well, John F. Kennedy was following State Department Publication 7277. The production of fissionable materials for use in weapons would be stopped, and quantities of such materials from past production would be converted to non-weapons uses. Why do you think that they're trying to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon? Do you think that the nation of Iran is capable of harming the United States? They know full well that the United States is capable of annihilating any nation on the face of this earth that dares mess with us. But they are following State Department Publication 7277. They are going to prevent all nations on the face of this earth from obtaining nuclear weapons. The United States has nuclear weapons. Why can't another nation have nuclear weapons? It's pretty hypocritical for the United States, in my opinion, to dictate to the other nations of the world what types of weapons that they're allowed to possess when we possess the same weapons. States owning nuclear weapons would not relinquish control of such weapons to any nation not owning them, and would not transmit to any such nation information or material necessary for their manufacture. We're going to zoom in. We're going to talk about another very, very revealing fact. The armed forces of the United States and the Soviet Union would be limited to 2.1 million men each, with appropriate levels not exceeding that amount for other militarily significant states. Go look at the figures, current figures of our military forces. We are pretty much close at this moment to that 2.1 million men now. And I might add that over the years, starting with George W. Bush the first, or George Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush president. He signed legislation that closed many of our military bases. When I mean closed to U.S. forces. Although I cannot confirm this yet, but many people have stated, and I suspect that it's true, that these quote-unquote military bases are being manned and housed by Russian soldiers. For in the New World Order, the United States military is going to be deployed to Southeast Asia and Australia, and the Russian army is going to be deployed to the United States when martial law is declared. UN peacekeeping powers would be strengthened. Measures would be taken to develop and strengthen United Nations arrangements for arbitration for the development of international law and for the establishment in Stage 2 of a permanent UN peace force. We are in Stage 2 already, ladies and gentlemen, because whether or not you want to believe that the Second Iraq War was fought with the blessing of the United Nations, most of the nations that were in George Bush's coalition of the willing are also members of the United Nations. So it was the United Nations war that's being fought, and it's still being fought. The war in Afghanistan is being fought under United Nations auspices. These are wars of conquest. Not only are they fighting Afghanistan in order to bring them into the quote-unquote international community, we are there to protect the opium trade. So the drugs that are being sold by the United States Central Intelligence Agency to the American people to fund their black operations can still continue. An international disarmament organization would be established for the effective verification of the disarmament program. And we have that, ladies and gentlemen. Go on the internet and start researching the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. It's an agency that's never talked about in the national news, but it has a budget, it has a director, and you can find that they are the ones that are in charge of disarming our national military, and through other organizations they will be in charge with FEMA of disarming the American people. And it also says states would be committed to other measures to reduce international tension and to protect against the chances of war by accident, miscalculation, or surprise attack. Now that seems to me a pretty utopian pie-in-the-sky attitude on the part of the United Nations and those that wish to strengthen the institution, because it's in man's nature to fight wars. And what they're talking about is they are going to reduce the capabilities of those that love freedom and peace, their ability to fight wars, and leave all those nations that subscribe to the communist theory and form of government. They're going to retain all their capability to fight any war they wish. If you think that you can trust the Russians to reduce their military, you had better think again, because they're still communists. Communists still run Russia, and it's their communist allies here in the United States that progressively weaken our military through no-win wars, wars without any clear hope of victory, wars without any clear exit strategy. They're taking away our ability to fight wars. They're taking away our ability to protect the American people. They're taking away our ability to protect our way of life and to strengthen the communist-inspired United Nations organization and its charters and its conventions and its treaties, and it's all there. And we're going to continue down this document, and it says a UN peace observation group would be available to investigate any situation which might constitute a threat to or breach of the peace. And what they're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, we have a treaty that we signed with the Russians, and it's called the Open Skies Treaty. And our arms control treaties, START 1, START 2, SALT 1, START 2, SALT 2, excuse me. And what they're talking about is that UN Peace Observation Group are communists. They are here and have been here for the last 20 years, since the presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush, overseeing the dismantlement of our military bases, the dismantlement of our bomber forces, reduction of our Navy, the reduction of our Air Force, the reduction of the Marines, and the reduction of the Army. In order to weaken the United States, in order to weaken the American people, for as Nikita Khrushchev says, told Richard Nixon a long time ago, that your grandchildren will live under the communist flag. And he knew exactly what he was talking about. It's time for the American people to throw away the television set. And it's time for you to learn something, and hopefully this broadcast wakes you up to those surprising facts. In the third stage, because there is 3 stages of disarmament, during the third stage of the program, the states of the world, building on the experience and confidence gained in successfully implementing the measures of the first 2 stages, would take final steps toward the goal of a world in which states would retain only those forces, non-nuclear armaments, and establishments required for the purpose of maintaining internal order. They would also support and provide agreed manpower for a UN peace force. So really what they're saying is that all the nations of this world are going to have a total police state, and they're just going to be one arm of the United Nations Army, the UN Peace Force. The UN Peace Force, equipped with agreed types and quantities of armaments, would be fully functioning. That means no nation on the face of this earth, ladies and gentlemen, would have the power to go against the will and the whims, the edicts and the dictates of the United Nations. And another salient point that we have to get to here, the manufacture of armaments would be prohibited, except for those of agreed types and quantities to be used by the UN Peace Force and those required to maintain internal order. All other armaments would be destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes. And when they're talking about that, ladies and gentlemen, they are talking about your firearms. So don't think that it can't happen here, because it's happened to every nation on the face of this earth throughout the history of the mankind, and it's going to happen here. The manufacture of armaments would be prohibited, except for those of agreed types and quantities to be used by the UN Peace Force and those required to maintain internal order. So what they are saying is that only the United Nations Peace Force and only your internal police forces will be those that will be allowed to have weapons. So what's going to happen to Marlin Firearms? You know, Marlin Firearms Company is closing its doors. Would you like to know who bought Marlin Firearms Corporation, ladies and gentlemen? It's called Cerebus Capital. You know who Cerebus Capital is owned principally by? It's owned by George Herbert Walker Bush, the great conservative president, and his son George Walker Bush, that everybody had such faith and hope in and thought that they were good Americans. Their investment firm is in the process of buying up every American arms manufacturer, and within the next 5 to 10 years they will all be closed down. And if you don't believe that, do some research. Marlin Firearms is closing its doors. Their products are no longer going to be made available to the American people. And that is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. And it was the Bush family that were principals, very principal involved in the initial creation of the United Nations. There is no difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party. They are all following this same agenda. They are following State Department publication 7277. They are following State Department publication 3972. They are following the United Nations Charter. They are following the United Nations Participation Act. They are following Public Law 87-297, the law that disarmed the American people over 50 years ago, signed by President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And we are in grave, grave danger. Our freedoms have been in danger for a century. It makes no difference if Barack Obama becomes president of the United States. It makes no difference if Mitt Romney becomes president of the United States. The goal will remain the same. Their goal is to create a world government. Their goal is to destroy not only the United States, but all nations on the face of this earth. There will be no national identities. There will be no national pride. There will be no national culture. There will be the United Nations, and all the peoples on the face of this earth will be its subservient slaves. And I don't know about you, America. I don't know about you, everybody out there in the world. I don't want to live in that kind of world. I don't want my sons and my wife living in that kind of world. And for those of you that are awake and care, I know that you don't want to live in that kind of world. And our mission and our objective should be to awaken those that are asleep. And there's a few more salient points in the document which I'm going to find here and we are going to read. And I'm going to zoom in and we're going to discuss these. The elimination from national arsenals of all armaments, including all weapons of mass destruction and the means for the delivery. The elimination from national arsenals of all armaments. That means when they're talking about an arsenal and they're talking about an armament, they're talking about not only the military weapons that each nation possesses, but they are talking about the weapons that the American people possess. Do you remember when Charles Schumer of New York, the state senator, United States Senator, if you want to call him that, I'd like to call him something a lot worse, but I won't, proposed that the people of the United States who wanted to own a firearm have an arsenal license. He proposed that because the socialist Charles Schumer of New York knows that this State Department publication 7277 exists. He knows all about Public Law 87-297, and that is why he proposed that all American gun owners have an arsenal license in order to identify everybody that owns a firearm, in order to restrict your rights that are guaranteed as written by God in the United States Constitution. And your rights do come from God. Your rights to self-protection and the protection of your family and property come from God. Our founding fathers recognized that, and they wrote that in the document. They gave us the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. If you notice that it's second only importance to freedom of speech, and it's in the middle of all of your other rights, because if the right of freedom of speech and religion and the right to bear arms are destroyed, all the rest of your rights will become meaningless. The establishment and effective operation of an international disarmament organization within the framework of the United Nations to ensure compliance at all times with all disarmament obligations. And we have that, as I said, ladies and gentlemen. It's called the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, and you can start researching them on the internet. There is also a companion to this publication. It's called Blueprint for the Peace Race. It's written almost verbatim from State Department publication 7277, and it's more explicit in its goals and its objectives. The Blueprint for the Peace Race can be found in the other document that I have uploaded to Scribed. It's called the Treason Documents. www.scribd.com, and that's what we're reading again tonight, because I believe that these documents are highly important, and it's highly important that the American people know that these documents exist, and that we have to all make a collective effort. And I hate using that word because the word collective comes from the communist ideology, but we have to work together in order to awaken our fellow countrymen to the dangers that we're in. And we're going to continue, and we will scroll back to the screen, and we will talk about a couple other points. Compliance with all disarmament obligations shall be effectively verified from their entry into force. And what does that term compliance mean? It means that you'll do whatever the United Nations tells you to do. Compliance with all disarmament obligations shall be effectively verified from their entry into force. Verification arrangements shall be instituted progressively and in such a manner as to verify not only the agreed limitations of reductions take place, but also that retained armed forces and armaments do not exceed agreed levels at any stage. Disarmament shall take place in a manner that will not affect adversely the security of any state, whether or not a party to an international agreement or treaty. As states relinquish their arms, the United Nations shall be progressively strengthened in order to improve its capacity to assure international security and the peaceful settlement of differences, as well as to facilitate the development of international cooperation and common tasks for the benefit of mankind. And what they're really telling you there, ladies and gentlemen, is that the United Nations is going to be an all-powerful institution, and that they're going to decide the internal affairs of all nations, because once they have complete control and all our arms are taken away, they will be able to dictate the domestic internal affairs of every nation on the face of this earth. And we will continue down. States that have not acceded to a treaty effectively prohibiting the testing of a nuclear weapon shall do so. So, as I said before, the war with Iraq was a war to accomplish this goal as laid out in State Department Publication 7277. There will be a war with Iran, I believe, in the next 6 months. And the war with Iran is going to be fought under this auspice and this document. They are following this document to the letter. They will not allow another nation on the face of this earth to acquire the weapons that we possess. And I believe that the war with Iran will accomplish a couple of their objectives. It'll send the price of oil through the roof, which will further weaken or collapse already weak economies, and it will further strengthen the ability of the United Nations to strip any nation on the face of this earth their sovereignty away whenever they see fit, without any protest from anybody. Do you really feel that Iran has the capability of harming the United States? I don't believe that Iran has the capability of harming the United States. I don't believe any nation has the capability of harming the United States. The reason that the United States is hated all over the world because we're harming everybody else. George Washington, our first president, gave us a warning. He told us not to be engaged in foreign entanglements. We had a foreign policy that worked well for over 140 years. It was called the Monroe Doctrine. That we took care of our sphere of influence in the world, which was the Western Hemisphere, and we stayed out of the affairs of Europe. We stayed out of the affairs of Asia. We stayed out of the affairs of Australia. We stayed out of the affairs of South America. In order for there to be total peace and prosperity and happiness in this world, we all need to learn to live together, and we do not need an international organization known as the United Nations dictating the foreign policy or affairs of any nation on the face of this earth. And as I said, there'll be more wars, more conquests. There'll be more shootings in the United States, more high-profile shootings, in order to whip up hysteria to get the American people to relinquish their firearms. And if the American people do not willingly relinquish their firearms, they will create the conditions necessary for the American people to willingly turn in their arms. They will collapse the economy, and I believe that's going to happen very soon. Because hungry stomachs are obedient stomachs. They'll create such mass terror and mass hysteria that the American people will demand that firearms be turned in. And they will make themselves in the process looking like that they're the good guys, that they're the benevolent people, that they're the protectors, that they're the ones that are going to bring you peace and security. Benjamin Franklin, many years ago, had an interesting quote. He said, "People who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither liberty nor security." And I believe that I will take the wisdom of all our founding fathers over the lies and the treachery of our current politicians. America needs to wake up, and we need to be young again, and we need to be strong again in order to be the mightiest nation on the face of this earth. Because if the American people go down, and the United States goes down, the world is going to be plunged into total despotism. And there's also another quote, to paraphrase Winston Churchill: "Imagine a boot being on your face forever." As I said in a previous broadcast, it's up to you, America, which way you want to go. Do you want a world government, or do you want to be Americans? Do you want to be that quote-unquote shining city on a hill? In order to get your rights and your freedoms back, you need to be aware of what's going on. And hopefully, this broadcast and many broadcasts like this on the internet will help wake everybody up to the dangers that we're in. Over the next coming weeks and months, I'll not only be talking about the treason documents, I'll be talking about the Federal Reserve System, secret societies, the Illuminati, and various other organizations, including the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, the ones that are working to bring about this world government and this new world order. And I would ask that everybody be patient with me, and I want to apologize. My internet connection was lost here twice, and I don't know how this video is going to turn out. I'm going to upload it to YouTube and see what happens. And I just want to say that I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be fighting for freedom as long as that I draw breath in my body. And that to my friends on Facebook and all the other social networks, and Harry Wolf, you're my heroes. I'd like to thank Harry for letting me be on his network and giving me the chance to do this. And I'd like to thank God for giving me the courage, the strength, and the wisdom to continue on with all of this and what I'm doing. And with that, I'd like to say good night, and God bless you all.